The locksmith handed me the last key, and I stared at the silver medal in my palm. In 2 hours, my children would arrive at what they still thought was their inheritance. But they were about to learn a hard truth. You can't ignore someone for years and expect them to leave you everything. My name is Susan, and I'm 72 years old. Before I tell you what happened when my children came home to find the locks changed and their names erased from every legal document I owned, I want to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or state in the comments. I'd love to know who's listening to my story today. Now let me take you back to where this all started. I spent 47 years building the life my late husband Richard and I dreamed of. We raised 3 children in a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in Westchester County. Michael, the eldest at 49, Jennifer at 46, and David, my youngest, at 43. Richard passed away 6 years ago from a sudden heart attack, and I'd be lying if I said I ever truly recovered from losing him. But I kept going. I had to. I had our grandchildren to think about, our home to maintain, and a life Richard would have wanted me to continue living with dignity. Richard had been a commercial airline pilot, and I worked as a high school English teacher for 30 years before retiring. Together, we'd been smart with money. We invested wisely, paid off our mortgage early, and built up a comfortable retirement fund. By the time Richard died, we owned our home outright, had healthy investment accounts, and I had his life insurance policy and pension to support me. I wasn't wealthy by Manhattan standards, but I was secure. The house alone was worth over $1 million, thanks to the neighborhood's development over the decades. My children knew this. They'd grown up watching us build this life, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. After Richard died, I thought my children would be there for me the way I'd always been there for them. And at first, they were. Michael called every Sunday. Jennifer stopped by twice a month. David texted regularly. But as the months turned into years, something shifted. The calls became shorter, the visits less frequent, the texts more sporadic. I told myself they were busy. Michael had his law practice in Boston. Jennifer was juggling her marketing career and 2 teenagers in Connecticut. David was building his tech startup in Austin. They had lives, responsibilities, demands on their time. I understood that. I really did. But understanding didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. What I didn't understand was how the nature of our conversations changed. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, every interaction became transactional. Michael called to discuss his son's college fund and whether I might contribute. I wrote a check for $15,000 without hesitation. Jennifer mentioned how tight money was with both kids in private school and asked if I could help. I sent her $20,000. David's startup needed an investor, and I was the first person he thought of. I transferred $50,000, proud that my son was an entrepreneur. Over 3 years, I gave my children nearly $200,000 in total. I never asked for repayment. They were my children, and Richard and I had worked hard so we could help them. I wanted to make their lives easier, but here's what started gnawing at me. The money requests increased while the genuine connection decreased. I'd call Michael to tell him about my doctor's appointment, and he'd cut the conversation short, saying he had a client meeting. Jennifer would visit but spend the entire time on her phone, barely looking at me. David stopped calling altogether unless he needed something. I felt it in my bones. The slow, painful realization that I'd become an ATM machine instead of a mother, a financial resource instead of a person. Still, I made excuses for them. They're stressed. They're busy. They're dealing with their own problems. This is just a phase. It wasn't a phase. Last October, I was carrying laundry down to the basement when I missed a step. My foot caught on the edge of the carpeted stair, and I tumbled down the entire flight. I landed hard on my left side. The pain in my hip was immediate and excruciating. I tried to move and couldn't. I was alone in that basement for 40 minutes before I could reach my phone, which had fallen 3 feet away from me. The paramedics told me later I was lucky. A fractured hip at my age could have been fatal if I'd hit my head or broken something worse. I spent 5 days in the hospital. They put 2 screws in my hip and told me I'd need extensive physical therapy. More importantly, they told me I couldn't live alone for at least 6 weeks. I needed someone there to help me. Getting up, bathing, cooking, managing medications, driving me to appointments. From my hospital bed, I called Michael first. My hands were shaking as I dialed. I'd rehearsed what to say, but when he answered, all I could think about was the time he'd broken his leg playing football in high school. I'd taken 3 weeks off work without hesitation. I'd slept on a cot next to his bed the first 2 nights when he was scared and in pain. "Mom, that's terrible," he said when I explained what happened. "But I can't just drop everything and come stay with you. I have depositions scheduled for the next 3 weeks. These cases are worth hundreds of thousands to the firm." The cases. Not people, cases, worth hundreds of thousands. I'd just given him $15,000 for his son's education, and he couldn't spare 3 weeks for his mother who'd just had surgery. I looked down at the hospital bracelet on my wrist, at the IV line in my arm, and felt something, cold settle in my chest. "Maybe just the first week?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "While I'm most vulnerable?" "Mom, you're not understanding. I can't drop everything for you. Have you called Jennifer?" Those words, "I can't drop everything for you." They would echo in my head for months. I had to pause and collect myself before I dialed Jennifer's number. She answered on the 5th ring, and I could hear traffic in the background. "Mom, what's up? I'm driving to a client presentation." I explained the situation again. The fall, the surgery, the 6 weeks of recovery, the need for help. 6 weeks? Her voice went up an octave. "Mom, I can't commit to 6 weeks. Tyler has soccer 3 times a week, and Emma's in the school play. I'm already stretched thin. Can't you hire someone?" "I don't want a stranger in my home," I said. "I want my family." "Well, we can't drop everything for you," she said, echoing her brother's words exactly. "We have lives, Mom, responsibilities. Have you talked to David?" By the time I called David, I already knew what he'd say. "Mom, Texas is like 1,000 miles away," he said, "and I'm in the middle of a critical funding round. Investors are looking at us right now. If I leave, the whole deal could fall apart. Can't you get home health care or something?" "I raised you," I said quietly. "For 18 years, I dropped everything countless times. When you had the flu, when you broke your arm, when you needed me at 3 in the morning because of nightmares. I dropped everything." "That was your job as a parent," David said. There was no malice in his voice, just matter-of-fact certainty. "We didn't ask to be born. You chose to have kids. That came with obligations. But now we're adults with our own obligations." I hung up without saying goodbye. I lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like ice on a pond in early spring, spider webbing out in all directions. A social worker came by later that day to discuss my options. She was kind, professional, and completely unaware that she was witnessing the exact moment I stopped being a mother and became a woman with a problem to solve. I hired home health care. A lovely woman named Patricia came to stay with me for 6 weeks. She was 58 from Jamaica, and she told me about her 3 children who called her every single day, who took turns visiting her every weekend, who were planning a big celebration for her 60th birthday. One morning, about 3 weeks into my recovery, Patricia was helping me into the shower. It was humbling having a stranger help me with such intimate tasks. But she never made me feel ashamed. "You're a strong woman, Miss Susan," she said. "You'll be back to yourself soon." "I don't know if I want to be back to myself," I said. "The woman I was let people treat her poorly." Patricia looked at me with those wise eyes. "Then be a new version, the one who knows her worth." That afternoon we sat in the living room, and she showed me photos of her children on her phone. 3 smiling faces, arms around their mother at a beach somewhere. "You raised them right," I told her. "I raised them with love," she said, "and they give it back. That's how it should work." That's how it should work, but that wasn't how it worked in my family. She saw me crying and didn't ask why. She just sat next to me and held my hand. A woman I'd known for 3 weeks showed me more maternal comfort than my own children had in 3 years. During those 6 weeks of recovery, I had a lot of time to think, time to review my life with clear eyes, time to see patterns I'd been ignoring. My children visited a combined total of 3 times during my entire recovery. Michael came once for 40 minutes. Jennifer stopped by twice, both times mentioning how hard it was to get away. David didn't visit at all, though he did send flowers with a card that read, "Hope you feel better soon." But they all called when I forgot to transfer money for Michael's son's spring semester tuition. They all remembered to ask about the estate planning documents I'd mentioned updating. They all wanted to make sure their names were on everything: the house deed as future inheritance, the investment accounts with beneficiary designations, my will that split everything 3 ways. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was an asset, an aging portfolio they were managing from a distance, putting in minimal effort while waiting for the big payout. The crack in the ice spread wider. In December, 2 months after my hip surgery, I called my attorney. His name is James Whitmore, and he'd handled all of Richard's and my legal affairs for over 20 years. "James," I said, "I need to update all of my documents." "Of course, Susan," he said. "What changes are you thinking about?" "I want to remove my children as beneficiaries from everything." There was a long pause. "Everything?" "Everything. The will, the trust, the beneficiary designations on my accounts, the house succession plan. I want them removed entirely." "Susan, this is a significant decision. Have you thought this through? Sometimes families go through difficult periods, but—" "James, I've thought of nothing else for 2 months. They've made it clear that they can't drop everything for me, so I'm dropping them from every document that bears their names." I heard him typing. "All right, let's schedule a meeting. We'll need to discuss alternatives for your estate, tax implications, and make sure this is properly documented. When can you come in?" "Tomorrow." The meeting took 3 hours. James walked me through every option, every consequence, every alternative. He asked repeatedly if I was certain, if I wanted to think about it longer, if I wanted to talk to my children first. They had 6 weeks to talk to me, I said. While I was recovering from surgery, they couldn't be bothered to help me through. I'm done talking. We created a new estate plan. Every asset would be distributed to charities upon my death, organizations that supported elderly care, education scholarships for underprivileged children, and animal welfare. The house would be sold and the proceeds donated. My children would receive nothing. James also helped me revise my power of attorney and healthcare proxy. I'd had Michael listed as my POA and Jennifer as my healthcare proxy. I removed them both and assigned these roles to Patricia, my home health aide, who'd shown me more genuine care in 6 weeks than my children had in 6 years. "One more thing," I said as we finished. "I want to create revocable permissions for the house. I need the legal right to change the locks and revoke any keys that are currently out there." James nodded slowly. "You're planning something." "I'm planning to live the rest of my life on my terms, with people who actually care whether I'm alive or just waiting for me to die. I didn't tell my children immediately. I wanted everything in place first. In January, I had new locks installed on every door. The locksmith was a young man named Carlos who didn't ask why a 72-year-old woman needed her entire house re-keyed. I changed the code on my garage door. I had a security system installed with cameras at every entrance. I moved important documents from my home office to a safe deposit box at my bank. Then I wrote 3 letters, one for each child. I didn't write them in anger. I wrote them in clarity. I explained that I'd spent the past 6 years watching our relationship become transactional, that I'd given them nearly $200,000 while receiving nothing but excuses and distance in return, and that their response to my medical emergency had shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities. I explained that I'd updated all my legal documents to remove them as beneficiaries. I explained that they no longer had keys to my house or any legal authority over my affairs. I explained that I was not cutting them out of my life entirely, but I was cutting them out of my death. "If you want a relationship with me moving forward," I wrote to each of them, "it will be based on genuine care, not financial expectation. You're welcome in my life, but not in my will. I mailed all 3 letters on a Friday in late January. I knew they'd arrive on Monday, and I knew exactly what would happen next. Monday afternoon, my phone started ringing at 2:15. Michael called first. I let it go to voicemail. "Mom, what the hell is this letter? Call me back immediately. We need to talk about this." Jennifer called at 2:40. I let it go to voicemail. "Mom, are you serious right now? You're removing us from your will because we couldn't drop everything during a busy time? That's insane. Call me back." David called at 3:30. I let it go to voicemail. "Mom, I just got your letter. This is crazy. You can't just cut your kids out like this. I'm booking a flight to New York. We're going to sit down and talk this through like adults." I didn't call any of them back. Tuesday morning, Michael called again. This time I answered. "Mom, thank God I've been trying to reach you." "I know. We need to talk about this letter." "No, we don't. Everything I needed to say was in the letter. My decisions are final." "Mom, you can't be serious. You're going to give our entire inheritance to charity because we couldn't help you for 6 weeks?" "No, Michael. I'm giving my money to organizations that actually help people because my children made it clear I'm not a priority unless there's a financial benefit. That's not fair. We have lives, responsibilities. So do I. And for 47 years, I dropped those responsibilities whenever my children needed me. You made it clear that courtesy doesn't run both ways." "Mom, I couldn't just leave my law practice for 6 weeks. Do you know how much money I would have lost?" "Yes," I said. "Probably less than the $15,000 I gave you for your son's college fund 6 months before I fell down those stairs." Silence. "That's what this is about? Money?" "No, Michael. It's about the fact that you had no problem taking my money but couldn't give me your time. Not even 3 days. Not even 1 week. You couldn't drop everything for me, so I dropped you from every document. It's simple cause and effect. This is insane. I'm calling Jennifer and David. We're coming there to talk some sense into you." "You can come," I said, "but you won't get inside. The locks are changed." I hung up. If you're watching this and you believe in protecting your own peace after years of giving, hit that subscribe button. This story gets even more intense. Wednesday afternoon, all 3 of my children showed up at my house. I watched them on my new security cameras. Michael tried his key in the front door first. When it didn't work, he tried it again, jiggling it harder like that would somehow change the result. Jennifer tried the side door. David went around to the back. Then they all stood on my front porch, looking at each other with dawning realization. Michael rang the doorbell. I opened the door but left the chain lock engaged. "Mom, let us in," he said. "No." "Mom, this is ridiculous," Jennifer said, pushing forward. "We're your children. You can't lock us out of your house." "Actually, I can. It's my house. I own it. And you no longer have permission to enter it without an invitation." "An invitation?" David's face was red. "We don't need an invitation to our family home." "This isn't your family home anymore. This is my home. You made it clear you have your own lives and can't be involved in mine, so I'm respecting that boundary." "Mom, please." Jennifer's voice took on a pleading tone. "Can we just come in and talk about this? We flew across the country. You couldn't drive 2 hours when I was in the hospital, but you can fly across the country now that your inheritance is at stake. Interesting priorities." Michael's lawyer training kicked in. "Mom, I understand you're hurt, and you have every right to be. We should have been there for you. We made a mistake. But you're making a permanent decision based on a temporary situation." 6 years isn't temporary, Michael. 6 years of increasingly distant relationships where the only time you engaged with real enthusiasm was when money was involved. 6 years of me giving and giving while receiving less and less. That's not temporary. That's a pattern. "So you're punishing us?" David asked. "That's mature." "No, I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. I spent 6 weeks recovering from surgery with a home health aide who showed me more genuine affection than my own children. She checked on me because she cared, not because she was waiting for a check. That taught me something valuable." "What?" Jennifer asked. "That I deserve better, and that blood doesn't entitle you to anything except the grace I choose to give. And right now, I'm choosing to give my grace elsewhere." They stood there for another 10 minutes trying different approaches. Michael tried reasoning. "Mom, we can work this out. Let's go to family therapy together." "I don't need therapy to tell me what I already know. I needed children who showed up. That ship has sailed." Jennifer tried guilt. "How do you think the grandkids will feel when they find out you cut their parents out of your will?" "I've set up educational trusts for them. They'll be fine. Better than fine, actually, because their money won't go through parents who view me as an ATM." Jennifer's face went pale. "That's not fair." "You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about fair. Fair would have been one of you coming to help me for 1 week. Just one. But you couldn't even manage that. So don't talk to me about fair." David tried anger. "This is unbelievable. After everything we've done for you." I almost laughed at that last one. "Everything you've done for me? Please, David, list it. I'd love to hear." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He tried again. Nothing came out. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. Finally, I said, "I'm going to close this door now. If you want to rebuild a relationship with me, you're welcome to try. But it won't be based on financial expectations. It will be based on genuine care and effort. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them." "And if we leave them," Michael asked, "then you'll have made your choice, and you'll live with it, just like I'm living with mine." I closed the door. They stayed on the porch for another 20 minutes, arguing among themselves. I watched on the camera as they gestured, raised their voices, and finally walked back to their cars. Michael punched his steering wheel before driving away. Jennifer cried. David sat in his rental car for 15 minutes staring at the house. Then they were gone. Michael tried to challenge my competency through the legal system. He filed paperwork claiming I wasn't of sound mind when I made these changes, that I was possibly suffering from dementia or undue influence. James Whitmore shut that down fast. He provided documentation of multiple meetings where I demonstrated complete lucidity and understanding of my decisions. He had me evaluated by 2 separate psychologists who confirmed I was mentally sharp and acting of my own free will. The judge threw out Michael's petition in under 3 weeks. Jennifer tried a different approach. She started calling regularly, being sweet, asking about my day. But I could hear the calculation behind every word. She wanted back in the will, not back in my life. David sent a long email apologizing and explaining that his startup had failed, that he'd lost the $50,000 I'd invested, and that he was sorry he hadn't been there when I needed him. I wrote back, "Thank you for the apology. The money was a gift, not a loan. You don't owe me $50,000, but you did owe me basic human decency, and you failed to provide it when it mattered." In March, something unexpected happened. Jennifer showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon. I watched her on the camera, and she wasn't dressed in her usual business attire. She looked tired, older. I opened the door, chain still on. "Mom, I'm not here to talk about the will," she said. I wanted to see you. Can we talk?" Something in her voice was different. I unlatched the chain. She came in and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd done her homework as a teenager, where we'd had 1,000 family dinners. "I've been thinking about your letter," she said, "really thinking about it. And you're right, about all of it." I waited. "When Dad died, I was scared of losing you too. And somehow I dealt with that fear by keeping distance. If I wasn't too close, it wouldn't hurt as much when you eventually—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "When I die," I said. "Yeah." She wiped her eyes. But the distance became habit, and the habit became who we were, and I didn't realize until I got your letter that I'd lost you already. Not to death, but to my own emotional cowardice. Go on. The money stuff. You're right about that too. It was easier to ask for help financially than to ask for help emotionally. Easier to treat you like a bank than like a person I might lose. It was messed up. I was messed up. And now? Now I want to know if it's too late. Not for the will. I don't care about that anymore. For you. For us. Is it too late to actually be your daughter again? I looked at this woman who was my child, who was flawed and scared and finally being honest. No, I said. It's not too late. Jennifer started visiting every Sunday, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. We'd have coffee and talk about real things, her marriage, her kids, her fears about aging, my loneliness, my grief over losing Richard. She helped me clean out the attic one weekend, sorting through boxes of family photos. We cried together looking at pictures of Richard, of the kids when they were young, of happier times. I miss him every day, I told her. I know, she said. I miss him too. And I'm sorry I wasn't here to miss him with you. Michael eventually called and asked if he could take me to lunch. We met at a restaurant halfway between his office and my house. I'm not going to apologize just to get back in your will, he said, but I am going to apologize because I failed you, and because Dad would be ashamed of how I acted. Yes, I agreed. He would be. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I'm still going to be busy with work, but I can promise I'll try harder, if you'll let me. I'll let you. David was the holdout. He stayed in Texas, nursed his wounded pride, and sent perfunctory texts on holidays. I didn't push. He'd come around or he wouldn't. That was his choice. In June, I called James Whitmore again. I want to revise my will, I said. I thought you might, he replied. I set up a trust structure that would benefit my children after my death, but with conditions. They'd receive their inheritance in stages, tied to demonstrated care and involvement in my life. If they maintained consistent, genuine relationships with me for the next 5 years, they'd receive full shares. If they disappeared again, the money would revert to charity. It's not about control, I explained to James. It's about incentivizing what should come naturally, but apparently doesn't. I also established separate educational trusts for my grandchildren to be managed by trustees, ensuring my children couldn't access those funds themselves. The house would still be sold upon my death, with proceeds split. Half to my children if they'd maintained our relationship, half to charity regardless. But I didn't tell my children about these changes. Let them think they were still cut out. Let them choose to be in my life because they wanted to be, not because they were owed something. Today, almost a year after I sent those letters, my life looks different. Jennifer visits almost every week. Michael calls regularly and came to stay with me for 3 days last month when I had a minor surgery. Nothing serious, but he was there anyway. David sent a long letter last week saying he was ready to talk if I was. Patricia, my home health aide, has become a dear friend. I hired her to help me 1 day a week, not because I need it physically, but because I enjoy her company. I've joined a widows support group, started volunteering at a literacy nonprofit, and reconnected with old friends I'd let slip away while I was so focused on being available for children who weren't available for me. My children know the locks are changed. They know they're not in my will. They don't know about the trust structure I've set up, about the possibility of inheritance tied to authentic relationship. Maybe I'll tell them someday. Maybe I won't. Because here's what I learned. When someone tells you they can't drop everything for you, believe them, and then decide what you're going to do about it. I dropped them from every document. I changed every lock. And in doing so, I reclaimed something I'd lost. My sense of worth as a human being, not just as a mother or a wallet. They came home to find everything changed, and in that change, we found a chance to build something real. That's my story. That's my justice, and I've never felt more at peace.